Making sense of a four-dimensional, data-driven world is a challenge. There's plenty produced for companies, scientists, governments, hospitals, but it's all in silos. The Jumptuit group are in the neutral data business. Gather it, share it, and analyze it, they say, and you can reclassify, predict, and recluster for the benefit of all the sectors: health, infrastructure, housing, education. I'm Andrew Wilson, and I'm in Davos to talk to Jumptuit founder Donald Leka about the democratization of information. Don, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. First of all, bring us up to speed with where Jumptuit is right now. I gather it's the Jumptuit group now, so clearly you're growing.
Yeah, so we're focused on several verticals. We've really verticalized the Jumptuit solution to meet the needs of different vertical market sectors. So we've begun with Jumptuit Autonomous Transit as the first one. We're really tackling some of the issues that came to light during this period of COVID and the disruption of the supply chain, the global supply chain and logistics around the world.
What did we learn about how we absorb data in the infrastructure, in the transportation infrastructure setting?
We really learned during COVID that our systems were not as resilient as we thought they were. We also learned that there are factors, external factors in different market sectors that can impact other market sectors. So one great example would be the outbreak of COVID in Vietnam in the second wave. So Vietnam missed the first wave, but they were impacted by the second wave, and their vaccination rates were very, very low. So they were impacted directly, which resulted in the manufacturing sector being shut down. And this impacted the supply chain around the world. So many companies depend on Southeast Asia for manufacturing and production. So we saw the impact of multiple events across multiple sectors impacting the whole world.
So that's a great example, because we remember at the time we talked about this just-in-time delivery system that we got used to, and how as soon as there was a chink in that, things started to slow down, if not actually grind to a halt. So what could Jumptuit bring to that situation to improve it?
So if you look at Southeast Asia, and Vietnam, and you look at all of the countries that there are manufacturing dependencies, whether it's Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, Mexico, other countries, we could have looked early on. Jumptuit could see that the vaccination rates in those countries was very low. In fact, it was in low single digits in terms of fully vaccinated people. So they were wide open for this second impact. Months earlier, the U.S., for example, the United States, was sitting on stockpiles of vaccines. They were just sitting there, and we could have, in advance said, look, there's a potential exposure here. If you look at the various scenarios of what could occur, this could have a detrimental effect on the global supply chain, and we could have gotten those vaccines to those countries earlier and assisted in the distribution, administering those vaccines, and that would have had an impact.
Jumptuit talks about neutral data, as if that is the holy grail. You get all this information, then you shed it of all its bias, right, and you shed it of all of its single task destinations, and turn it into something that is more informative to the whole. Am I in the right direction there?
Yes, I think that we rely too heavily still on belief systems and constructs that were created in some cases hundreds of years ago. They're brilliant. They were brilliant for their time, but the world is a much more complex place today than it was then. Oftentimes you'll have, let's say, like the financial crisis in 2008, people said at the time, experts, this is just like what was happening in the 1930s. But when you look at it from a data standpoint, over 95% of the variables were different in 2008 than they were in the 1930s. So you see this huge discrepancy. So we're utilizing these kind of constructs, which we've relied on for centuries, but now because of the world that we've created ourselves and the increase in velocity of events and the complexity that we as human beings have created, we need systems that can address that velocity and kind of the numerous additional variables that exist in the world.
You're working on a system, it's artificial intelligence driven, it's a SaaS system, it's software as a service. This is presumably what you're heading towards.
Yes, I mean, we've been very much focused. I think we've addressed some of the critical elements. So first, we've addressed the need for real-time data, live stream data to utilize for the analysis, because events occur so quickly, the velocity of events is so fast. So in order to keep up with that, you have to rely more heavily on real-time data as opposed to historical data. So that's one of the critical pieces. Two, we built a platform that does do this type of multi-sector analysis. We're able to overlay data and events that's related in various sectors to see the potential impacts. Three, we move forward in time. We push this process forward through scenario forecasting. So we look at the various scenarios, the planned scenarios and alternative scenarios. And for example, in logistics, we'll say, what is the optimal time of departure? What is the optimal route? And we look at these types of variables and we try to diminish the number of incidents, the potential incidents that can occur that can negatively impact that journey.
We're already doing that to an extent. If someone wants to ship something from Shanghai through to New York City, they'll look at the weather, they'll look at the geopolitics, they'll make their decisions on the route depending on all sorts of variables. They'll have access to that data. So we're already doing that to an extent. Am I right? Or
not really. So, for example, truck drivers who are, transporting goods from one location to another, very much they have to rely on their own experience, or they have to access data dynamically to see if there's going to be events that will impact that journey. But in the end, when you start to look at events that are occurring and you're looking at the forecast out a few hours or a few days, and you start to integrate this type of technology into your navigation system, think about it, that these types of technologies in terms of neutral data, raw data, not an observation that a person's made down the road, but neutral data that is reliable. And you start to integrate that into your navigation systems, your flight trackers, into your mobile devices, into your wearable devices. What basically you're doing is you're minimizing the number of potential incidents that can occur. And when you look at it from a transportation standpoint or a logistics standpoint, then you're minimizing the economic incentives. You're minimizing the number of claims that will occur. You're ultimately minimizing or diminishing, the insurance, the costs from an insurance standpoint in terms of insuring those goods.
So this really is a 21st century version of when a butterfly flaps its wings in China, someone sneezes in the United States.
Well, I think the challenge with something like this is, there are times when you just want to rely on your instincts, or you want to rely on, you have a sense that the forecast might not be accurate, or, so that's always going to be a challenge. But when you implement these types of things systematically, you're going to reduce the potential number of incidents that can occur. If you do that, you will reduce the damage, and the cost associated with that. And that's really the economic driver that will help to really focus the industries on this type of technology.
Something we're all talking about every year in Davos, and this year's no exception, climate change. What can Jumptuit help in the fight against climate change?
So one is to minimize when you start to reduce, for example, the length of a route, and you optimize, that journey. And we factor in so many different variables, for example, how much time the vehicles will spend in traffic when the emissions are greater. When you start to diminish those systematically across a fleet of 50,000 or 100,000 vehicles, you start to diminish actual carbon emissions. So these are not just goals that we see, but this is actually a systematic way, and it becomes auditable because you can do it on, and it's also forward-looking. So you're able to say, okay, we're going to do this from a forecasting standpoint. So at the end of the day, you have a tool that will enable you to forecast, look forward, to reduce carbon emissions.
Can you tell me we're looking at a data revolution?
We're definitely at a point where real-time live data streams, in terms of utilizing that, we're at that point of a revolution, for sure. In terms of multi-sector analysis, I think there still needs to be, it's just the way our system is designed. People become experts, our schools, our universities are designed to silo, thought and process and analysis. So we're still not connecting all of the thought silos together. So that part we need to work on. And we also need to get away from reactive systems and move to these kind of scenario forecasting systems so we can reduce the number of potential incidents, the number of things that can go wrong. And in that process, we'll create a better world in that process.
Don, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.